Kevin Hobbs, welcome to Mindworks in Conversation. One of the things I find most compelling about SP educators is how often their work is shaped by creative practices, whether it's acting, writing, visual arts, music, or movement. And so I wanted to explore how your artistic identity informs the way that you prepare SPs, how you coach them, how you support them. And so, to begin with, could you share a bit about your artistic background and how it first connected to your work in patient simulation?
Absolutely. Well, when I first started, I think a lot of people in the SP world. I was and still am a theater artist, and I had some free time. And this was at University of Toronto. Some opportunities came up, and so I jumped on board first as an SP, doing the role play, and then through that I just continued to move along and into being an SP educator, working in curriculum, and so on and so forth. And I continued doing that work after I left U of T. I moved to the Niagara region and started up an SP program there. And in that program, I saw opportunity. There was enough of a leash, a loose leash, that I could do other things as well. So I brought theater into the training of healthcare students. So I used readers theater, and we did a number of sessions reading the play Wit, and then having dialogue with those students. And I did that quite a number of times until I finally left that job. Um, and I've just continued. So I'm still, as I say, still a theater artist. I teach at Brock University. I teach applied theater at that. How do we use theater as research, and how do we use theater as educational resources? Uh, and just to finish up that this at least this little part, I'm completing my PhD right now in curriculum studies. I'm knocking on wood, as I say. I'm about a month away from my defense. Uh, it's in performance pedagogy, and I'm looking at two performance pedagogies. One is called Playbuilding, and one is called the SP methodology. So how do these two performance approaches uh, train medical students in the competency of health advocacy? So for me, if someone asks, how is my art and how is my work in the SP world connected, I feel that they're so deeply connected. It's almost impossible to disconnect as part of the DNA of my approach to doing this work.
Yeah, yeah. Talk a bit about your dissertation. So, what are some of the ideas that are coming out of that? What have you learned along the way? Not only from doing this work as a theater person, also as a simulationist, but also what you've learned in the process of developing a PhD dissertation. What have you learned?
Yeah, well, the process of doing this, I had 4 sessions with. So this was a case study. 4 sessions with five medical students from a Western university in Ontario, Canada. And there were three of the sessions were play building sessions. One of the sessions, so play building sessions just is, and I've co-written a book on play building as well. So I used all of those that methodology. So it's discussion, dialogue with each other. What is, in this case, what is health advocacy? And then we put together short theater scenes. And through this process, the medical students began to examine themselves and what their ideas of health advocacy are. The fourth session is an SP session. They were familiar with that methodology, what was different in this case was I set it up not as an OSCE, so they're not being marked in any way. In fact, my approach was to not even set goals. I set a scenario. I had three different scenarios, and what what was really interesting for me to find was the medical students, they were able to relax into engaging in the role play, something that they said they hadn't been able to do in at Western in any other scenario because they knew they weren't being watched, they knew they weren't being evaluated, and the scenarios were such as you're talking on an even basis with a colleague on some kind of health advocacy measure. Um, and that gave them a more of a chance, this is what they told me, more of a chance to reflect on their relationship, not only within the professional community, but also with health advocacy as well. So that was a big thing. One thing I really learned is um, medical students want more agency. And I don't think this would have come out had I not used this performance pedagogy. They want to have a little more control over their own education as walking in and saying, this is the curriculum, do this in many ways, parrot back what you're being taught, and then you can move on to the next level. Um, so those are at least some of the findings at this point.
And that, what you just said, is one of the first tenets of adult education, where adults want to have some say over what they learn and have some input into that because they can tell you what they need to learn. Of course, we want to feed them, maybe as faculty what we think they should learn. But so you're suggesting that this approach is really a collaboration.
All the work that and this is me both as an artist and as particularly a theater artist and also as a researcher and educator. I very much think in the terms of relationship. What's my relationship with my students? What's my relationship with people I'm researching, usually with, I don't like to say researching on, and what's my relationship with other theater artists? Even if I'm the playwright and I have put myself, in a corner somewhere and have written this play, when it comes out, sees the light of day, it still has to engage the theater artists, whoever the actors are, whoever the director is, etc. So relationship is critical to my approach. And I don't think I would have gotten there as an educator and as a researcher if I hadn't been there first as an artist.
So when you say that medical students want agency, do they also want to say in what is actually in the curriculum? Has this method that you're using empowered them to actually think differently in terms of the curriculum? Because these are people that are going to be faculty members at some point. They're going to go on and become teachers. And so this sounds very much like it's an approach to teaching future faculty, not only perhaps a methodology, but a mindset.
It's absolutely correct. Particularly for something like health advocacy, which is for many very personal, and the literature out there on health advocacy speaks of you learn through doing. And so SP methodology, you are doing, even if it's in a role play scenario, you're dialoguing, you're finding approaches, and you're finding approaches with someone else, whoever happens to also be in the room with you. And certainly with play building, it's the same thing, doing even more because they're coming up with the scenarios, they're coming up with the ways to communicate their ideas through theater. So going back to that, how much agency do the students want? They, for health advocacy, they want a lot. They don't want to be told, and this came out in the findings as I'm writing them up right now for my dissertation. Yeah, it's come out that they have very specific ideas, and in this case, with these students, medical school hasn't been giving them. It's been inadequate in terms of because they're being told, they're being lectured at. And going back to the literature of health advocacy, the lecturing doesn't work across medical schools broadly. There needs to be more of engagements, more of the doing. So a performance art form really helps that. And I think this can also started with first and second year med students. I'd like to continue this research. I'd like to move up, through into residency and then into faculty. How can faculty engage the students using this methodology?
How do you develop the scenarios with them?
Well, with the play building, we start with dialogue, and that can, depending on what do we want to talk about at this point? What are your ideas of health advocacy? We'll write down those ideas. Which one's really speaking to you, to us as a group? And then, okay, let's talk. How do we want to present these ideas? So, I'll give you an example of what we did, vaccine hesitancy. How do we talk about vaccine hesitancy, which becomes, part of a health advocacy approach? And what we ended up doing, and it's a lot of these ideas, I just nudge, but a lot of these approaches come from them. Well, what if I was a patient and I came in and I wanted to know more about a vaccine because my mother is sitting beside me. And so we set up that scenario and then we improvised and they improvised. I sat back and I could come in at any point, say time out, but they they did it. I just, in a way, I showed them the door. Maybe I gave them the key, but they walked through. That's another really interesting thing about the research. In this case, they liked to do it. Initially, it's like, I'm not an actor. I can't do this. I've heard this how many times? How many times in the SP world have we heard this? I'm not an actor. I can't do this. And yet, how many times when people finally get into doing it, they find there's great value.
Yeah, it's watching medical students, and you think, boy, they really do need acting lessons, because you have to act as a doctor. You have to act in a role that you may not be completely comfortable with quite yet. You kind of grow into the role of being a physician, and so in perhaps in that work, as in life, we have to develop an act or
Yep,
a persona, that we can carry through, what we believe.
yep, yep, yep. There's something, and this comes from a theater education approach by from Dorothy Heathcote. Uh, was from England. Used theater as a teaching tool, and it's called Mantle of the Expert, in which you portray the expert. You're not the expert, but what is it that you have to do? What is the cloak you have to? What is the information that you need in order to portray yourself as an expert? And in doing so, you're rehearsing yourself into your profession.
There was a time where I was a therapist. My first job was clinical psychologist and family and marital therapist. And there was a therapist in Philadelphia. This is going back to the 80s. And she did something called problem solving theater, where once a month she would gather therapists together who were having difficulty with their families or their couples or their individual patients, got them on stage, and then they would do with some combination of theater, psychodrama, improvisation as you're talking about, and they would act out the scenario in some ways, maybe not word for word, but the spirit of whatever impasse their patient was. So this was dealing with the problems the therapists were having, providing treatment.
Yeah.
So I've always been interested in how theater, even though I'm not an actor, how theater can really be used as a learning opportunity for therapists, for clinicians.
Yeah. You may not be an actor, but we're all performers. It's right. We all have our different masks, for different situations, or different masks or different hats, however you want to put it. But for theater, I like to use that word mask. With friends, we're one portray ourselves in one way. Fashion, we portray ourselves in another way. I also say because I do workshops that involve play building outside of my PhD work. And I always start off with, we're all playwrights, and we're all improvisers. As a playwright, you get up in the morning, um, you plan out your day. As a playwright does, they plan out their play, and then you begin to proceed through your day. And of course, things never go according to plan, and that's when you become the improviser. Have to adjust. So you're adjusting your play on the fly. And I find that these theater concepts are helpful in presenting to an audience that's who will always say automatically, "I'm not."
What came first, theater or simulation? I get the idea that theater for you came first. How did you fall into the patient simulation field?
Yeah, I was doing very well as an actor in Toronto, and then things became fallow for me. And then University of Toronto, I had a friend of mine gave me a nudge and said, "Hey, do you want to come do this role play stuff? It's kind of fun. You get some extra money." And sure, let's give it a try. And I think my first thing, I may have had a liver ailment. I can't remember. It was in terms of SP methodology, it was as basic and straightforward as you could get. And I found that I liked it. And I found then that some of the roles that I was being offered in theater were uninteresting to me. I was doing the same thing over and over again. I found that this area of teaching, uh, using the techniques that I'd learned, I've been using over the years, was more and more attractive. So I stuck with it, and so here I am now, still, one foot in that theater profession world, and one foot in the SP education simulationist.
Yeah, and that's really why I wanted to talk with you and others who have their feet in at least two different areas. Do you use this methodology for preparing SPs as well to do their work with medical students or whatever clinicians who are involved?
Yeah, no, no, and I have to say that it's been a while. So after I left my the position of after I created the program in the Niagara region, I haven't trained SPs for a while, with a couple of exceptions. I trained some people for my PhD work. Reflecting on when I was training SPs on a much more regular basis, um, I where I always start is I always start with the story. We were talking about narrative a little bit earlier, and the story is the most important thing for me, rather than learning the facts, because as an artist, frankly, that's how I understand the world. But never mind a play that I happen to be in, and I find that the SPs, or at least the ones that I've trained anyway, unless they kept it secret from me, that they appreciated the story approach first. Whether they happen to be actors or other artists or not, it was the story that always came first. And then after that, we can work our way through the nitty-gritty details. So if anything, that's the connection between my art and training SPs.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things that I've tried that seems to work well with SPs, and this is perhaps applying a narrative medicine approach that we were talking about earlier to this work with SPs, is having them watch a video of encounters
Yeah.
and viewing it not so much first to assess clinical competencies, but to look at it as a text, as a story. What are the compelling aspects of this story? Um, what do you think of the actors, who are playing this, both the med students and the simulated patients, and who is uh, let's talk about the authenticity of the acting, not so much the acting, but the story itself. Does the story itself make sense? And so I find that there are really interesting ways of approaching this work that we do with SPs, um, getting them to appreciate what they're involved with is a form of theater, but also apprehending it, appreciating what they're seeing on a video, and that kind of engages them in a kind of a qualitatively different way. Gets them out of the assessment mode and more into the story mode. The assessment then can follow from that. So that's just another example of having your foot in two different two different mindsets. One, the SP that really needs to be to clinically assess the skills of the student as well as appreciate the story that they're seeing, as well as the story of the student that rarely comes up in this. It's almost like what's not said when you're watching the student that is the story itself.
Yeah, I thank you for saying that. And that's one of the something that really you said that comes up is feet in both worlds and what we have to or assessment specifically. Yes, SPs they'll do the assessment while they're also role playing. So I always say, well, that's as a cognitive task. That's underappreciated in terms of the complexity of it. There's at least two things going on, and I will say, and those who are seasoned as stage actors, they'll get it. You are on stage, you are portraying whatever you're portraying, whoever you're portraying, but you're also listening to the audience. And so there are always two things going on. I discuss that or have discussed that with the SPs. I said, so you're doing a lot more than people realize. And so just to be aware of that. So I know I've come across SPs who are so caught up in the role that they completely forget, that their other job, which is for me usually it's either in assessment or it's in how do you give feedback in an educational context. That's something that's critical. Otherwise, why are we doing this?
How does a director give you feedback? And or talk about your performance when you're rehearsing. And they said, well, they'll say something like, "Why did you make that choice?" And so I've started to incorporate that message to the SPs that are actors who probably understand that, that idea of questioning the student about their choice, not in a judgmental way. Why did you make that choice? But let's talk about your choice of doing this versus that, of withholding empathy when I probably needed it most. Do you see that as an approach to using theater as well in giving feedback?
Oh yeah. Well, well, and I'm also a director. So as a director, I'm always asking the questions. I think as an artist, just generally, artists ask questions. If you're going in, it's like I know all the answers, and I'm going to create this piece, whatever area you're in right now. It's probably less interesting what the final piece is than you're asking questions of the world, of yourself. on a regular basis. And I think you can absolutely take that and move that into the feedback realm. And that's actually one of the things when I taught feedback, and I actually ASPE has a Association of SP Educators has a module that I wrote on feedback, and it's just if there's anything, be curious. The people you're being curious with, they'll suddenly start clicking in, and then that's where the learning starts for them. Again, you're opening the door for them, so be curious.
Yeah, absolutely. I follow the Harvard University or Center for Simulation model, Jenny Rudolph and her group that talk about debriefing with good judgment, but it also goes by another name of empathic inquiry.
Uh-huh.
And when I went through their training years ago, they said that debriefing training is essentially curiosity training. You know, when you're debriefing a learner, you really need to do it with genuine curiosity and not pointing the finger of why did you do that? You know, but I'm really interested how you screwed that up. You know, tell me more. What happened? You know, and so being curious and being confused are really so important in this work.
I used to say to the SPs when I was training them, it's like, or it's really more facilitators who might be in the room with the SP and the learner. And I say, well, if you find that you're making more statements than asking questions, then you're probably not doing the best possible job.
How do you get SPs to make that shift from giving pure feedback and jumping right to coaching to being curious and asking questions? How do you get them to make that switch? What's your approach?
I, I start with them and say, and I time and time again, I've said, well, you tell me, do you feel that you were asking more questions or were you making more statements? Who is doing the most talking? If you're making statements, then you're probably doing most of the talking. And that's where we start. And then a dialogue will erupt and stuff will erupt in a good way, emerge. Things may come out at this point. Well, I really wanted them to know this, and say, okay, so you're trying to force the learning on them. Yes, you're right. They do have to know. Give them the space to come to that conclusion. So I start with that question, and this is what I do as a director as well. And this is what I do for myself as an artist. I start with that question, and through a dialogue, either with myself personally or with others, then I find what's really behind someone making more statements and fewer questions. So there's no one way, but dialogue, dialogue, dialogue.
And how do you get them to do this with students who are not doing so well,
Uh,
less competent than they could be? How do you get them to empathically debrief the students?
One of the things I found that was helpful was, okay, I see you're struggling here. Yeah, and students may not even have the um, just the reflectiveness of it, that self knowledge of maybe I didn't do as well. Okay, let's go back into the role play. These are in educational scenarios again. Let's go back into the role play and try it again. And let's try it differently. And it might be something like, can you ask about this rather than about this? And then when the student goes in, this becomes embodied learning, right? They go back and they try it differently. Pause. It's brief. Well, how did you feel about that? What was different for you? And suddenly you're giving the student something tangible to work with and something they can, I'm hoping anyway, you knock on wood when you say this, there's at least a seed planted that there might be more than one way of doing things. And again, that goes back to me as an artist. How many different ways I've never played Hamlet, but how many different ways can you play Hamlet? How many different ways can you play this character, this play? There's a ton of options. So open up the groundwork or open up the forum for those options.
I just have a question or two more for you about the role of art in SP work. Um, do you think it's underappreciated or not talked about as much as it could be?
Yes. Yes, because I think there's resistance to arts. Arts, if we look at medical education in itself and the history of medical education, it's there's a lot of very concrete approaches um, to it. There's measures, how well people are doing, and that's and art is almost works against that, doesn't it? Yes, there are scales. This movie out of a scale of 1 to 10 is an 8. I've never really taken. I really don't care about those scales because I see there's something more to art than a scale. Um, and so I feel that people get, artists sometimes get pushed down. Like I remember, um, this is in that that program that I created. Uh, my, uh, my boss essentially, at one point, he said I was just starting up the program. He said, um, "Well, then you and your little actors can come in and have fun." And I recognized at that point that this performance pedagogy is being reduced to, well, little actors coming in and having fun as opposed to a profession with theory behind it. Um, and I think there's a lot of administrators who look at it as uh, little actors. I think I think we need to be talking more about not just the actors as well, but just art in general and performance in general, and bringing forward the theories. And that's what I'm doing a lot in my certainly my PhD and my other work as well. Bringing those theories. So we need to, in the eyes of administrators and others, we need to legitimize ourselves. I think there's no question that we feel legitimate in terms of the work we're doing. We know there's a purpose and it's not simply going out and having fun. So we need to talk more about it. And I think there's a fear of doing that.
Kevin, you're reminding me of a conversation I had with someone in Europe a long time ago when I was doing a presentation on the use of standardized patients. And this physician came up to me and can't remember what country he is from. And he said, "You Americans," and he was really talking about North Americans because North America created the standardized patient national board exam, you know, very precise, you know. He said, "You don't realize it's not a science, it's an art." And he was talking about medical education. And I kind of objected to that because I was fully into standardized patient mindset at that time, having started at the national board in Philadelphia and then went into a medical school. I'm coming back to this now that we're talking about the art of medicine, the art of preparing people to practice medicine. And I've seen how the SP National Boards exam have really did limit, it seems, the scope of what's possible through simulations. The practice, the rehearsal, trying on different roles, trying things out. What do you think? Do you think that the national boards kind of took the energy out and put it in a different direction?
Oh,
I'm exaggerating, I think, but I was curious about your thoughts about that.
yeah, because I've involved up in Canada. I've involved with a number of the pharmacy board, the PBC exam, um, national licensing board, the LMs. So it's been a while. LMs for physicians and also the physio. national exam as well. And some were a little more open to looking at this work more from the art of as a but a lot of them were really just concerned is we need to measure. It was psychometrics 100% of the time. And so these this advantage of human to human interaction, which is an art, right? It's something we can't, putting AI aside right now, but it's something we really can't um, objectify to the point that and measure every inch of it. We need to appreciate that art form and the humanity behind the art form. And I think in, I don't know, I'm not sure in the States, but I think in Canada we're slowly coming out of it. Um, and that's why the students or the participants in the research, and not just this, but other research that I do up here as well using theater with healthcare students. I see there's a hunger for it, a hunger for this, the art of, as opposed to the science of. That's why they jumped in, my five participants, and jumped in and fully embraced this work. Um, but yep, yep, it's a big ship, and we're turning it very, very slowly.
Yeah, there really is a balancing act between the need to assess skills, to
Yep,
assess competencies,
yep,
uh, but not at the expense of missing
yeah,
the story of medicine. And that's where narrative medicine comes in, where it's kind of balancing out the biomedical approach, the purely symptom-based, examination of patients with really appreciating the story of the patient as well. That those two things together really fit in. And how do you make the most of it of both of those things? The information and the story blending together is really, I think, the challenge of the future in our field.
yeah, yeah. I guess there's a point in which you're going to have to ask. So, what is your job as well, a healthcare worker generally? But let's go specific to physician. What is your job as a physician? Is your job to deal with the disease? And certainly that's disease-based medicine for so many years. And I think there are pockets within medical schools that still exist that, or is it the person, the holistic? I call it person-based medicine because in my master's I widened it out when I did it because I was looking at again theater, the treatment of people with traumatic brain injury in healthcare contexts. And person-based is everybody. It's the care for the caregiver, the healthcare worker, care for the patient, care for family members. It's a larger context, and that I think is, if anything, I think that's the next level where healthcare is going. And I think some healthcare professionals know that instinctively, and some don't. And so, what can we do as simulationists to provide that? As a playwright, I'm always thinking about that larger context.
Well, Kevin, really, what a great pleasure to talk with you about this, about the emergence or the reemergence of arts in our field, and hope we can talk with you again about your dissertation and what's come out of that. So, congratulations on you're almost there.
Almost there, so close. I taste it. Not close enough, though. That's what I keep saying.
Let me ask you one more personal question. Um, Someone told me that you're ready to defend when you're ready to kill your dissertation advisor. Have you ever gotten to that point?
Well, I have two actually. And we had a meeting yesterday, a Zoom meeting yesterday, and yeah, I was pretty close until we had a nice discussion yesterday. And they began to admit their own uh, weaknesses isn't their areas that they need to work on, that they're giving me feedback on. And then they said, well, yeah, I'm not very good at that either. That was such a relief. so so I haven't killed them and I haven't walked away. That was the other thing. I've learned all I need to know. Do I really need dissertation? Now I think I need to finish
Yeah, it's all about persistence. So, again, thank you so much and congratulations to this great accomplishment.
it. Thank you. I'm really glad you're asking questions and doing this work, just finding out about art and artwork.